Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, part of the weekly series organized by EU DisinfoLab. My name is Anna. I am a researcher here at EU DisinfoLab, and it's an absolute pleasure to be your moderator for this session. Today's webinar is extra special as it is hosted with the support of the US mission to the European Union. The collaboration allows us to dive deeper into the disinformation realities across European Union countries. The webinar we have lined up is titled Disinformation Under the Mediterranean Sun, which might sound a bit romantic, but at no point we are trying to fool anyone. We are not talking about vacations or sunny landscapes. Instead, we will be diving into the unique disinformation challenges and dynamics in Malta and Cyprus. Before we dive in, let me share a few housekeeping rules to ensure a smooth experience for everyone. First, we will be using Slido for the Q&A session later on. You can already connect by scanning the QR code that you see on your screen, or heading to slido.com and using the hashtag Disinfo. Also, as you may have noticed, this session is being recorded, and the replay will be available in a couple of days on the EU DisinfoLab YouTube channel. So I hope you're already connecting to Slido. In that case, I would love to know where you are joining us from today. So you can already start typing your answers. I'll give you a few seconds to see. I am based in Madrid. My colleague Quinton, behind the scenes, is in Brussels. We have so far someone from Prague, lovely city. Brussels, fantastic. Malta, of course. Well, I think London, I think we can move. Now maybe I'd like to see which sector do you represent. So no worries, take a moment to share your answers here in Slido. And while you do so, let me thank you once again for being part of this very much important conversation. We are looking forward to your participation and insights as we explore the disinformation landscape in Malta and Cyprus. Okay, we have a large amount of people coming from non-government organizations, also academia, media. Lovely. This is great. This is great. Thank you, everyone. So now let's get started. I am delighted to introduce you to our two esteemed speakers for today's discussion. First, we have Loukia Taxitari, the editor-in-chief at Fact Check Cyprus. Loukia is a lecturer in experimental psychology at Neapolis University, Paphos, and holds a PhD in experimental psychology from the University of Oxford. Since 2020, she's been actively involved in fact-checking in Cyprus, and as of November 2023, she leads the Center Against Misinformation at Fact Check Cyprus. Joining her is Neville Borg, fact-checker at Times of Malta. Over the past 2 years, Neville has been at the forefront of debunking misinformation in Malta. Before diving into journalism, he worked as a researcher in fields ranging from culture and health to economics and media, bringing a well-rounded perspective to his fact-checking work. So with this expertise, we are set for an engaging discussion about the disinformation realities in these two beautiful islands. Let's start by exploring these challenges with Loukia. Could you tell us more about what's happening in Cyprus? The floor is yours. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. I'm so delighted to be with you, and thank you for the invitation. Let me share the screen. so we can talk a little bit about what is happening in Cyprus regarding disinformation. Can you all see my screen?
We can.
Okay, so indeed, we will talk about disinformation in the sunshine. Today it's over 20 degrees here in Cyprus, so very warm and very nice. But the disinformation landscape in Cyprus is also very warm. We are among the last in the EU regarding digital skills and how young people interact with online content. We are actually last in a survey where people checked whether the young, when they come across a piece of information, they will go look for another source. So young people in Cyprus don't do this. We have very reduced digital skills. Although there are initiatives from the Ministry of Research, Innovation and Digital Policy, we seem to fall far behind. So we will start with a brief overview of how the situation is on the island. Then I will talk a little bit about the fact-checking initiatives, and then I will present a case study, and then we can discuss about it or whatever you feel is more relevant or is more interest to you. So there are some peculiarities in Cyprus. One of them is that we share a lot of narratives with Greece because we have very special relations with Greece in terms of nationality and in terms of the language and the culture. Almost everything that circulates the Greek internet ends up in Cyprus. So there are narratives regarding politics, especially immigration is a very hot potato on the island. The Ukrainian invasion, health, of course. There's a lot of narratives going on, a lot of disinformation regarding vaccines, the COVID pandemic. Now it's getting, of course, it's winding out, but we still have it circulating. Then there is a lot of attention to the LGBTQ community. Recently, the marriage between same-sex couples was made legal in Greece. So there is a new discussion going on around this issue. In Cyprus, it's still not legal, and people are not allowed to adopt children. So there is a lot of discussion around that. Climate change, of course, as well. And then we have our own local narratives, especially around immigration, regarding the number of asylum seekers on the island, the allowances they get from the state, the demographic change that they cause. So these are issues that circulate a lot, and they receive a lot of disinformation and misinformation. And also the politics, they usually circulate around the alteration of the ethnic and religious identity of the island. And I'll explain a little bit more about this here. So the peculiarities, the special characteristics of disinformation in Cyprus have to do with the Greek, our special relationships with Greece in ethnic and cultural level. So the Greek disinformation campaigns, as I said before, they are very evident on the island. Then we have a lot of Russian influence on the island as well. So we have a lot of special bonds with Russia, religious, financial. A lot of companies, offshore companies, have their bases on the island in Cyprus. So a lot of Russian disinformation is circulated here. And of course, we have our special geopolitical circumstances. We are the furthermost, the easternmost part of Europe. We're very close to the Middle East, very close to Turkey, very close to Africa. So we are actually at the entrance of Europe. So there is a lot of interest in what happens there. We also have the Cyprus political problem, the division of the island. Turkey has a lot of influence on the north, and we have the so-called Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. So very special features here. And of course, we rely on tourism and on foreign companies and also capitals that have a direct effect on how the media outlets function and work. So what are the fact-checking initiatives in Cyprus? We have very little in terms of policies. There are no clear guidelines yet. The Cyprus Radio Television Authority does not have any guidelines regarding disinformation at all. The journalists have very limited provisions on misinformation and fake news, on how to treat them. And there is a complete absence of laws or official policy to control for these issues. And they are included within defamation laws or libel laws. There was an attempt over the past year to criminalize disinformation by the government, but there was a complete backlash from the opposition. So the process was blocked in the summer. And we can discuss more about this if you want later. So, of course, it's a gray zone, legalizing disinformation, but it was blocked. So this is how we proceed at the moment. 1 year ago, we established our Center Against Disinformation. It's called Fact Check Cyprus. It's part of the Social Computing Research Center at the Cyprus University of Technology. It's a member of EDMO and IFCN, and we're under review from the EFCSN. So we're a very young fact-checking center, 1 year. We've just completed our 1 year, but we are a very interdisciplinary center. We consist of fact checkers, journalists, academics, computer scientists, researchers who are interested in very many different aspects of how disinformation works and it spreads and how we can combat it. And then we have our external counselor from Greece, Fact Check, Thanos Sitistas. So we have a double goal here at the center. Of course, we have the fact-checking activities, but we also pay a lot of attention to digital literacy. We organize seminars. We go out to schools, various stakeholders, and we try to create a culture where digital skills are important and where they should be given attention to, because this is something that is not being taken care of by the state. So with the support of the Cyprus University of Technology, where we belong, and my university, Neapolis University, we pay special attention on this. Several collaborations, I'll just go through them and we can come back, because I think it's very interesting to look at a case study. So as I said before, there are various narratives going around, but one of our most important topics is immigration. We have a lot of immigrants, asylum seekers coming to the island every year. This has increased in the last few years, and it's calling for policies and different ways to handle this wave of immigration. And of course, this has created increased disinformation narratives within the society. They're being perceived as a threat. So we will see what happened last year when there were actual attacks, physical attacks against immigrants. And we're going to look at the chronicle, so the timeline that led to these attacks. So how did we get there? Of course, all these fake news, disinformation, propaganda played a very important role. So it all started on the 16th of August 2023. Special groups, specific groups in Facebook started circulating information about immigrant demonstrations at a specific place in Cyprus, where there are a lot of immigrants staying. So this was the beginning of an unrest in the society, suspicion against immigrants. Of course, the photographs circulating were not real. You can see how these people are dressed with long sleeves when August in Cyprus is like 45 degrees Celsius, but these photographs were being circulated on the internet and people believed that they came from Cyprus. So this was the beginning of the unrest. Soon, more information was coming out. One politician posted this map of Syria, which is a map by the European Asylum Support Service. And he claimed that the pink areas are areas in Syria which are not dangerous anymore, and people can actually return to their homes. Of course, this was a piece of disinformation as well. In reality, this was an old map. The 2023 map is shown here on the left, and you can see how the areas in red are much more extended than the areas on the right. Later on in the same month, there were more posts. So this is the person who was in charge of the immigrant demonstrations. You can see him on the right photo. This is a photo in Cyprus. And then on the left, there is another photo of a soldier who is holding a decapitated head. And people were claiming that it's the very same person who used to be in the Turkish army, and he's a Turkish Syrian jihadist who decapitated Christians and Kurds in Turkey. Of course, this was fake again, but all of this was leading to a great social unrest, turbulence. People were being very cautious against immigrants. They were very afraid that there will be attacks by immigrants. And then there was this post in social media in one of the groups of one of the biggest cities in Cyprus, and people claimed that that immigrant delivery men stabbed a police officer. A police officer was indeed hurt, and he was in the hospital, but he was there for a different reason. It was not immigrant deliveryman who stabbed him. He actually self-hurt. But this went around, and the very next days, there were people attacking deliverymen in Limassol, beating them and robbing them. So direct attacks had started against immigrants. And then at the beginning of September, this got even worse. More disinformation going around concerning the numbers of illegal immigrants on the island. There were some estimates talking about huge numbers. So Cyprus is less than 1 million people, and people were claiming that around 250,000 illegal immigrants were on the island. So you can imagine the percentage of illegal immigrants being claimed to be on the island. Again, these were fake numbers. We went and tested the official statistics, and we found that even though there was an increase this was the asylum seekers on the island were not more than 55,000, so a lot less than what people assumed them to be. And then at the 1st of September, we had the oh, this is in Greek, even the even the title. So on the 1st of September, we had the peak in this situation. There was a march organized against immigrants in Limassol, and people actually attacked places where immigrants lived and worked for many, many years. They destroyed their workplaces, they destroyed restaurants, supermarkets. It was a very, very bad situation, even for people who lived here for many, many years, who have been living on the island and working here for many years. So this is just to show an example of how disinformation can lead to real-world consequences. Immigration is a big issue for us even now. Of course, this was just an example, but we hear narratives all the time about how immigrants change the demographic situation on the island, how schools have 50% of their students being immigrants, or even 100% of their students. This is, of course, made up numbers, or numbers that are not presented as they should be. But they're creating this situation of unrest, and they're making underprivileged groups in the society being targeted more and more. So we are trying to tackle this, as I said before, in many ways, through fact-checking. So whatever comes to our attention, we try to debunk it. And then, of course, we try to educate people at schools, journalists who sometimes don't check, who often don't check their sources before reproducing something. And of course, now we are also talking to other stakeholders, such as the Cyprus Radio Television Authority, the Journalist Association, and we're trying to target disinformation in many various ways. So that was it from me. Thank you for your attention. I suppose we'll take questions at the end, Anna.
Yes, indeed.
So I'll just
thank you, Loukia. We'll have some questions at the end of Neville's presentation. Thank you for shedding light on the unique disinformation landscape in Cyprus. I personally would love to hear more about Russia's influence that you mentioned at the beginning through the historical ties and economic interactions, maybe later, because I believe that understanding these dynamics truly help us to grasp the bigger picture.
Exactly.
So thank you for sharing your expertise. Now I'll hand over the floor to Neville Borg, our next expert, who will guide us through the disinformation landscape in Malta. Neville, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm just sharing my screen. Give me 1 second. There we go. Can everyone see my screen?
We do.
Yes, perfect. So thank you, Loukia, as well, for that really, really great presentation. I think there are a lot of overlaps between what Loukia just said and what I'll be talking about in my presentation, to be honest. And I think it's really appropriate for these two countries to be, put together in this sort of discussion, because there's a lot of similarities between our profiles at the edge of Europe and the disinformation narratives that emerge from that. So I'm just okay. So this is a kind of a brief map of what I'm going to be talking about. So my idea is to give you a little bit of background into who we are as Times of Malta and our collaboration with Medmo, a little bit of an idea of what Malta's media landscape looks like, and then to delve a little bit deeper into a couple of case studies of some disinformation narratives and examples that have emerged over the past couple of years, I suppose. So first of all, what is the Times of Malta? So I'm the fact checker at the Times of Malta, and the Times of Malta is fundamentally a news organization. We're one of the oldest news organizations in the country, founded way back in 1935. And the picture you can see here on the side is a copy of one of our very first editions of the newspaper. I think this was in 1942. So obviously a lot of the headlines are about the war and this sort of thing. But to this day, we still publish a daily newspaper. So we're the oldest daily newspaper still in circulation in the country. But aside from the newspaper, obviously we have a very strong online presence. We run a news portal. We're the most visited website in the country. And we are basically the go-to source for news for most of the public. So most recent surveys suggest that over 60% of the public who get their news online get it primarily from the Times of Malta. So basically we do kind of classical journalism, reporting, investigative journalism, this sort of thing. But back in January 2023, we, sorry if you hear a dog barking, it's my dog having a meltdown. Back in January 2023, we started a fact-checking initiative in collaboration with the European Commission through the Mediterranean Digital Media Observatory. And through this, we've published over 130 fact checks since the beginning of 2023. And it's an initiative that has proven really popular with our readers. So they've spent over 34,000 hours reading our fact-checking work and articles over the past 2 years or so. This is what our homepage looks like. It's a screenshot taken yesterday. As you can see there at the top, circled at the top, we have a dedicated fact-checking section. And that's where you can find an archive of all the fact checks we've published over the years. Now, a little word about Malta's media landscape. So in many cases, or in some cases, it's what you would typically expect from a country's media landscape. So we have independent written press, including the Times of Malta, but many others, the Malta Independent, Malta Today, Love in Malta, The Shift, a couple of others as well. We have a public broadcaster, which a TV station and a couple of radio stations. But then things become a little bit, maybe a little bit more unusual. So we have quite a strong presence in the media landscape by the church, which owns a news portal, it owns a radio station, it owns not daily, I think weekly newspaper. And then we have a very strong presence as well by the two main political parties in Malta, each of which runs a media house essentially. So they have a TV station, they have a news portal, they have radio stations, they have publishing houses in some cases. So this is a factor that also contributes to the presence of disinformation across the country, as we'll see a little bit later on. I think one thing that is quite important to mention is, like many other places, I think Malta struggles with low levels of trust in the media. So there was a Eurobarometer study published just last week that shows that only 40% trust the written press in Malta, which is the lowest level in Europe. And similar levels show low trust in radio and TV, even fewer in websites and blogs, and even fewer than that in social networks, which is important because social networks are where most people come across news. So most people in Malta say they access news through primarily Facebook, but also other social media networks. Now, just to go on to the kind of some of the main disinformation narratives in the country, I've for the sake of this presentation, I've split them up in these two kind of classifications: political issues and social issues. In reality, there's quite a bit of overlap between the two, but I think this is quite a useful way to classify kind of the broad picture of disinformation. And there are some differences between the two. So if we look at political issues, these are often quite time-bound. So often they emerge, they follow the news cycle, so they relate really directly to whatever the scandal of the day is, whatever the political debate of the day happens to be. So they're quite closely linked to the news cycle, essentially. Very often they're quite technical in nature and quite legalistic. And this is because they're often emerging from claims made by political actors. So politicians, prime ministers, opposition leaders, ministers, political commentators as well. And this means that they are generally quite technical in nature. They're very often perpetuated by the party-owned media outlets. So we'll have a political actor making a claim that is false or misleading, and then this gets repeated by the party's news station, its news media, its radio stations, and then eventually it makes its way across the kind of the broader public, and it's parroted by party supporters. Again, mostly on Facebook, but also across other social media networks. Disinformation narratives on social issues tend to be a little bit different. So they tend to be about specific issues that emerge from time to time, but aren't directly related to the news cycle as much. So they deal with things like migration, they deal with things like crime, security, poverty, cost of living, these sort of things, which are also political in nature, but they are not strictly following the event of the day or the scandal of the day, so to speak. And these very often emerge mostly through social media groups. And they're often shared by anonymous accounts on Facebook groups quite commonly. But there are many cases where these sort of false narratives or misleading narratives are picked up by political actors and repeated within a political context, often with the hope of scoring points within whatever political argument they're trying to make. I think one thing that's interesting about social issues is they're usually quite localized. So we don't really talk about, I don't know, migration issues across the Mediterranean. It's always strictly related to Malta. It's always strictly related to local context. And they tend to be quite ingrained within the local narrative, so to speak. A couple of examples of each. So this is a case study of a fact check we published a couple of months ago, which dealt with the death of a young construction worker back in 2022. Basically, this was a young 20-year-old who was working on a construction site. He was delivering some items to a construction site when the building he was in collapsed, and it was a tragic incident. He died instantly, we can say. And as is the case with all these sort of incidents, a magisterial inquiry was immediately launched to understand the circumstances around his death. But many people felt, including the young man's family and many organizations and many general public in general, I'd say, many felt that the magisterial inquiry was not enough, and they called for a public inquiry into the issue. But the government, many months, resisted these calls for a public inquiry. And in this case, the government kind of took the line that the public inquiry would ultimately not reveal anything different from the magisterial inquiry, because the two inquiries are essentially the same. This is a claim that was made by the Justice Minister, but it was also made by many other political actors from the government side at the time. It was basically false. We ran a fact check and we showed how the two inquiries are fundamentally different in nature, with one inquiry looking into the criminal aspects of the case and the public inquiry looking at the administrative failings that existed. Eventually, the government had to give in to public pressure. It had to carry out a public inquiry, and lo and behold, the public inquiry did find the state responsible for a series of failings at the site. Here you can see a picture on the top left of the building that collapsed. As you can see, it was not the most secure building in the world, unfortunately. And the pictures at the bottom are the young man himself, Jean-Paul Sophia, who unfortunately died in the incident. And you can see the picture of we used in our fact with the Justice Minister, who made the claim basically that the two inquiries are the same, would find the same things, and there's no reason to carry out a public inquiry. Another example of a political disinformation narrative, and I've included this because it really shows how technical they can be sometimes, was a claim made about a recent reform to a proposed reform to Malta's drug laws. So ultimately, the government was proposing to reform the drug laws to be a little bit more understanding towards drug addicts ultimately and drug users. But once the reform was proposed, a narrative emerged that the drug reform would allow people to carry up to 500 ecstasy pills for personal use without any repercussions whatsoever. This was a claim made by many political actors, from the opposition leader to MPs, members of the public. Former drug users also pitched in to talk about their own experiences and how dangerous this reform is and this sort of thing. But ultimately, it was misinterpreting what was being proposed through the reform itself, which ultimately wasn't proposing that people can carry 500 ecstasy pills. It was only restructuring the way in which magistrates can deal with cases, so they could direct cases like this to drug courts rather than criminal courts, ultimately. A little word about kind of the social issues that Malta faces in terms of misinformation. This is probably the most popular and widespread disinformation narrative in the country, which is quite simply the size of Malta's population. Malta is the most densely populated country in Europe, so this is something that's really close, cuts close to the bone, and people really feel on a visceral level. And this obviously feeds off concerns about overpopulation, migration. It often, feasts on xenophobia and racism as well, unfortunately. But we've had a whole series of claims about Malta's population. So we've had claims that Malta's population has doubled in the past decade. We've had a whole range of different numbers about what Malta's population actually is. Some people said it's 717,000. Others have said over 800,000. Others have said it's reached 1 million. None of these figures are correct. So I think, like Loukia was saying, we get a lot of these instances of false numbers based on false studies or based on data and statistics that don't actually exist or are misleading. We've had claims that foreigners now outnumber the Maltese in the country. We've had misleading claims about how many foreign people are eligible to vote in Maltese elections. And then on the other side, we've also had people within the government arguing that migrant arrivals are actually lower than they ever were, which is also not true. The truth is very often somewhere in between. So here you can see a couple of examples of the claims I was talking about. So we have these Facebook groups talking about how there are now 450,000 foreigners and only 400,000 Maltese in the country, which isn't true. We've had other claims talking about an estimated population of 821,000, which also isn't true. And we've had different claims from the opposition leader and the prime minister here talking about population numbers, migration levels, this sort of thing. Second case study on this is related to one of Malta's biggest industries, which is the construction and planning sector. The example I'm mentioning here is a very controversial project to build an apartment block just 150 meters away from the Gigantia temples, which are the oldest freestanding structures in the world, if I'm not mistaken, and they're recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And part of being a UNESCO World Heritage Site means there's a buffer zone around the area to prevent construction and construction projects taking place. But there was a developer who argued that the apartment block he was proposing to build actually wasn't within the UNESCO buffer zone. He said instead it's in an area of archaeological importance, but not within the buffer zone. He made this claim during a planning board hearing. So he was presenting the project to the board that basically approves the development. The board took his word for it and approved the project and gave the project a permit to go ahead. But we published a fact check showing that this ultimately wasn't true. The project does lie within UNESCO heritage zone, buffer zone. As you can see from the map on the right, the little X is where the apartment block was going to be, and the red square in the middle is where the temples happen to be. So you can really see how close the development is. And partly thanks to the debunking of this claim, the permit for this apartment block was revoked, pending an impact assessment carried out by UNESCO. This is far from the only, misleading claim about the construction sector. We've had a whole range of claims about how well or how poorly the property sector is doing in Malta. We've had a similar claim about a planned development of a hotel and bungalows on the island of Comino, which is a small island, relatively untouched, just off the shores of Malta. And we also have a series of misleading claims about the zoning laws in Malta, including the Prime Minister, for instance, saying that they can't change the zoning laws because that would violate property rights. But we spoke to experts and we understood how this is not quite the case. Just to conclude, a couple of other final thoughts. We do have pandemic-related disinformation, not that widespread, but it does tend to linger. So we have claims about vaccines once in a while. We have claims about the World Health Organization trying to take over Malta's constitution. These things crop up from time to time, as they do in many other places. One thing that perhaps is quite particular to Malta, especially within a European context, is the abortion debate. Abortion is illegal in Malta. It's strictly regulated. There's a blanket ban on abortion. And anytime the topic comes up, it tends to be followed by a series of misleading claims and statistics about abortion rates internationally, for instance, and these sort of things. One interesting thing is that occasionally when large-scale international events come to Malta, they often bring about a series of false claims related to that particular instance. And one example is Europride, which is a big event related to the LGBT community, which was held in Malta in September 2023. And around that time, Facebook was flooded with a series of transphobic memes that were basically directly imported from the US right-wing media outlets, kind of. But also what's interesting is that we have relatively little disinformation related to international affairs. So for instance, Loukia was talking about how popular Russian disinformation narratives are in Cyprus. We don't really experience that at all. And we've also had very little about Israel and Gaza. We've had very little about the US elections. And these are generally disinformation narratives that are really, really popular around other European countries. And finally, scams, which are a huge problem. They're a huge problem everywhere in the world, and Malta is no exception. Many of these scams tend to use deep fakes of public figures, politicians, journalists, TV presenters, this sort of thing. And usually they're usually quite easy to spot, but we do have problems with media literacy, and unfortunately we have many people who tend to fall for these sort of scams. That's it from my end. These are my contact details. So anyone watching, please feel free to contact me or to reach out to me. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to hear any questions you may have.
Thank you, Neville, for such a compelling and detailed look at the disinformation landscape in Malta. It has a highly polarized political environment. And also, like the case studies you shared were both fascinating and troubling. I found it particularly striking how politicians can lie with such impunity, as in the example you gave about the reform to Malta drugs law. So I guess it's another reminder of the challenges we face when tackling disinformation. Thank you for sharing these critical insights, both you, Neville, and Loukia. Let's keep the conversation going and share even more of your knowledge with the community. I'm excited to open the Q&A session to hear your thoughts, questions, and insights. Before we begin, let me quickly remind you how to participate. We are using Slido as our Q&A tool. You can either scan this code that you can see displayed on your screen, or you can head to slido.com, enter the hashtag disinfo, and there you can very easily submit your questions. We have over 12 minutes for this Q&A session. Let's make the most of it. Feel free to ask whatever you wish, even topics that were not covered by the speakers. All right, so let's go for the first question. Do you think that AI-generated content is increasing the scale of the speed of malicious operations in your countries? Loukia, you can start, for example.
Yeah, sure. So, yes, of course, as in every other country, AI-generated content and technology in general is increasing both the scale and the speed and the volume of disinformation circulating on the internet. There are efforts to try and use AI tools for in tackling disinformation, but we're far from that at this stage. So it's like we're always a step behind, running to to get closer to how people use these technologies in a way that is not appropriate, and how they make the spread of disinformation even worse.
Yeah. Are you facing the same challenges, Neville?
Yeah. Sorry.
To be honest, what I find strange about AI, we were really worried about AI. We thought it would play a big part in the European elections, for instance, this year. And one thing we found is that it didn't. I mean, there is AI disinformation, but it's mostly kind of scammers stealing people's, images and stealing people's videos to create deepfakes to sell a crypto scam. That is mostly the AI generated content that we've seen in Malta. We were very worried that because I know this has happened in different countries, I think in Slovakia, if I'm not mistaken, we thought AI would be used to generate deep fakes of politicians saying certain things, or public figures saying certain things about political issues, or to inflame people's emotions and this sort of thing. But we haven't really seen that so far. Obviously, just because we haven't seen that so far, it doesn't mean we won't see that in the future. So I think it's still an issue that we really need to be careful about. And I think a big problem, unfortunately, is that the AI tools to detect deepfakes, for instance, are always a step behind the tools to create deepfakes. So you're always playing catch up with bad actors, really.
Yeah, there is actually a follow-up question very related. It's saying that if you are facing when fact-checking, if you are facing issues when fact-checking due to the misuse of AI, video manipulation, voice cloning, Deepfakes, Neville, you already covered this, but I guess that maybe not now, but maybe in the future you have to be very careful with this. Pablo Krivenko, given the ongoing war in Ukraine, how have disinformation campaigns related to the war impact public opinion in both Malta and Cyprus? Maybe?
Okay, yeah, I'll start. So, to be honest, like I said, there hasn't been much disinformation about the Russia-Ukraine war in Malta. I mean, at the moment we have the OSCE summit taking place in Malta, which is a big deal. We have, you know, Lavrov in Malta. It's the first time he's traveled to a European Union country since the war broke out. So it's you know, it's front page news all over the country at the moment. I think public opinion has remained quite consistently pro-Ukraine in the country. Obviously, you do have different voices, but I don't think they've really been influenced by disinformation campaigns, simply because many of especially the pro-Russian disinformation campaigns we've seen in many Baltic countries and in many Central European countries as well, haven't really reached Malta's shores and haven't really had much of an influence, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it's not the same Loukia in Cyprus. To one extent, the secret society is permeable to Russian propaganda and disinformation. If you could elaborate a little bit more what you mentioned at the beginning of your presentation about the influence of Russia and the
Sure, yes. So in Russia, we have, in Cyprus, we have a lot of, a big Russian community. So in Limassol alone, we have around 30 to 40,000 Russians. And a lot of Russian companies, as well as Ukrainian companies, have their bases here on the island. So we are kind of an offshore paradise for foreign companies, and we attract capitals. But also it's a very good place for Russians because we share, you know, the same religion. We're both Orthodox Christians. So there has always been, like, traditionally, there has been a link between, there are bonds between these communities, these countries, Cyprus and Russia. So we have seen that concerning the war, there is a lot of disinformation going around the internet. We often see news about how Ukrainians lead a very, you know, luxurious life, and they buy property in Cyprus. There have been news about, you know, the buying of a hotel in the north, the buying of villas in the south. So these have all been lies, but they have been going around. Well, when Navalny died, there have been rumors about how he died, you know, various things, but these are not limited just to the internet. They often go into the media outlets, so more even government outlets. So there is an issue there. We do have a problem. We do try to debunk whatever comes across us, but it has been difficult.
Unmuted. Thank you, Loukia. I'm seeing this question. I think it's already kind of answered by Neville, but Cyprus and Malta have been part of the EU for 20 years. As of this year, 2024, congrats. Have you identified any related disinformation about this fact or anything related to the European Union?
I think not so much about Malta's membership as such, but during the election campaign over the past, I mean, earlier this year, I think there kind of were a couple of perhaps misleading, representations of the EU's push towards, militarization. So some people calling it as, some people perhaps misrepresenting the extent to which what the EU is trying to do in terms of, pushing up its defense budgets, these sort of things. So I wouldn't say they're full-on, disinformation campaigns, but there has been a little bit of confusion and a little bit of debate over what the future of the EU wants to be. This is particularly interesting in Malta because we're a neutral country. So we have our neutrality is part of our constitution, and we're not, our constitution doesn't allow us to be part of a military organization. So the EU's so-called move towards, a European Defense Army, more militarization, this sort of thing, is a big topic of debate, or it was a big topic of debate in the run-up to the elections.
Would you like to add something? Okay. Loukia?
We don't have these issues either. We're very pro-EU oriented. Also because of our political problem. So because of the division of the island, the sense of safety of Cypriots lies with the EU. So there's no discussion there or, questioning about whether we're part of the EU because it is a very important part. As Neville said, we have other issues concerning the role of the EU in the Ukrainian war, whether they are inciting the war or, they are helping in sustaining it, or they want the war to continue. And there are other discussions as well concerning whether Cyprus should be part of NATO. And this is a hot topic for us at the moment, since Turkey is part of it and Greece is part of it. So there are a lot of conspiracy theories about that.
We are really running out of time and we have so many questions. Loukia, any government attempts to identify or counter Russian disinformation manipulation in the country? In particular, its influence public opinion. Please, a very brief answer.
No.
No, okay, that was...
No, it's a very complex issue. A lot of financial interests, around Russia. So we're touching the issue very cautiously.
Okay. The last question for you, Neville, is not in Slido, but in our chat. Maria Pia Meli, with regard to COVID-19 and pandemic-related anti-science disinfo, would you agree that a lacuna in science-based information on the ongoing pandemic from public health authorities in Malta is creating a vacuum that it's being filled by anti-science disinformation peddlers?
I'm not sure I understood the question. Can you repeat
I think
the first part?
I think that she wants to know if you have a dedicated team towards tackling COVID-19 pandemic, anti-vaccine disinformation at the times.
No, we don't have a dedicated team. So I mean, I'm the only fact checker at the time, so I am the dedicated team, I suppose. But I agree with her, if I understood correctly, that there is a vacuum sometimes that leads to kind of pseudoscience narratives taking over. We've had pseudoscience narratives also promoted by health professionals who really shouldn't be promoting those narratives. They've kind of died down a little bit recently, but it was a huge problem until a couple of months ago, I'd say.
Thank you. So I believe this was the last question. How fast this session has flown by. We've covered so much, and it's truly been a privilege to gain deeper insight into the unique disinformation realities of both islands. If you want to learn more about the disinformation landscape in Cyprus and Malta, don't miss the fact sheets on the topic. They are available on EU DisinfoLab website. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank the authors and reviewers of these fact sheets. Before we close, I'd like to share two important announcements. Next week, on Thursday, December 12th, we will be hosting another webinar titled How to Detect and Analyze Identity-Based Disinformation Theme, featuring our own experts from EU DisinfoLab, Maria Reza and Raquel Miguel. I would also like to ask you to just give us a more minute of your time. At the end of this webinar, you will be prompted to complete a brief survey where you can not only provide feedback, but also suggest future topics, or perhaps you have a service or a tool that can help combat disinformation. We are all ears. Thank you again to our speakers for these incredible insights, to everyone who joined us today, and to the US mission to the European Union for their generous support in making this webinar possible. Wishing you all a wonderful rest of the day, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.